Okay, just to let everyone, just to let everyone know, James, Andre, Tyler, and Celeste are on Zoom, and Yanni is going to be 10 minutes late from now, which is 9:33. So, thank you, Andrew.
Good, thank you. Am I waiting for this to change, or am I driving it? Driving it? Cool. Parks and foreshore first. So the parks unit is responsible for 3 activity plans. So we'll work through them in the order of parks and foreshore first, the largest, heritage, and then Takaro Avon River Corridor. So starting with this, and I guess importantly for some of the newer councillors, just to understand the full level of services that are provided by the parks unit. Community parks, and that's by far the vast majority. It's in the order of around 1,000 parks. Harewood Plant Nursery that some of you have visited out at Harewood, and that provides the vast majority of plant material, not just for the parks program, but also for transport and Three Waters programs where they need vegetation. The Botanic Gardens, you might have heard of that down the road. Regional parks, the residential red zone, which I think most people are familiar with, the foreshore and marine access. So we're responsible for that interface between water and land and structures that live within that space. We're not responsible for the water. And the environmental education team that covers, as the title sort of suggests, environmental education. We have a contract with the Ministry of Education to provide services as part of the curriculum, primarily for primary school age children, but we also do a lot of other education work on behalf of Three Waters in terms of water, waste, and also some civic, run some education programs for people that are interested in civic activity and what we do as a council. Excuse me. I've really just summarized most of those things. Just to put it in perspective, and there has been some dialogue and language about the volume of parks. There's parks and open spaces are getting a lot of focus around the world. I mean, a lot of the issues we have are not unique to New Zealand. Urban environments, intensification of housing, pressure on existing land, and the interface with climate change. But one thing that's becoming more and more apparent is, and there's evidence coming out now, that there's a strong link and relationship between people's overall well-being, including health, longevity of life. It's really becoming quite stark. But if you live in a city or an environment where you've got access to open space and parklands, the metrics are higher. So it is a really important part of a vibrant, livable city, urban environment. We're pretty well spread. We do have some gaps in terms of provision, and that's going to be one of our key focuses with our planning going forward, is trying to stay one step ahead of intensification, because you can't respond once it's happened. Now that comes with challenges. So we're going to have, we grew up on 900 square metre, quarter acre sections, one house, then a park. You're going to have four houses, and one of those sections might need to become a park, and it might become a very different park. Normally we define a park as a minimum of 3,000 square metres. Well, I think the future is not going to look like that. So we've got to be mindful that what we're talking about here is people's backyards, is not going to be in their backyard. And so these are the sorts of things we're starting to think about in terms of our planning looking forward. Because parks are a big part of trying to make sure that we have long-term resilient communities. And really, when you see really good examples of resilient communities, it's where everything is within walking distance and on their doorstep, and they feel like they're part of something and they've got what they need. And that takes a lot of different forms, of course. So what have people been saying? I guess a variety of things, and certainly over the last 3 years, I guess it's been an interesting 3 years with the impacts of COVID. People got out and about a lot. Parks became quite popular. It's about all anybody could do through that period. And I think people started to look at their city a little bit differently too. We do beat ourselves up a little bit. And I think it's fair to say, we're usually certainly in the top 30 percentile, if not the sort of top quarter percentile for the vast majority of our feedback that we get from residents. And if we miss out by 1 or 2%, we tend to sort of beat ourselves up a little bit. And I think we've got to be a little bit more realistic about what success looks like going forward, particularly with the financial constraints that everybody is facing. We've got to be able to make smart decisions about what success looks like. And really the key, I think, is, and I mentioned this to ELT last week, I think we, and I mean Parks, not our communications team, but we as Parks need to start communicating a little bit better what we're doing, why we're doing, in a more proactive manner, and put some focus in the next sort of long-term plan on how we communicate with people, to make sure that there's an understanding, because I think what we're going to be looking at is a time of change, and change is difficult for people usually. And so we've really got to be quite focused on how we talk to our communities about what we're going to do going forward, and how success should be measured. So I'm taking a lot of this material as read, and I'm just going to focus in on some of the key aspects. A green, livable city. I don't think there's anyone in the world that doesn't want to live in that. But what does that mean for Christchurch? That's what we've got to start defining better, so people understand what that means. A cultural powerhouse. Well, that kind of links to there's been some interesting feedback post the decision to bring parks maintenance services in-house, mostly positive. And a link between people's connection with their parks and their gardens. It is part of our culture here in Christchurch, and so we've got to stay quite focused on that. Inclusive and equitable. See, that touches on what I just mentioned about the changing dynamic of our city, the look and feel of our city with intensification. So we've got to stay focused on ensuring that we invest in an equitable manner, because the places people live in are changing quite quickly. And so we've got to stay one step ahead of that. Reduce emissions as a council. I mean, that applies to everyone. Obviously, people look at the green space and think, well, that's an area where we should be focused. And we certainly are with the adoption of the urban forest plan. And that focus on Indigenous species around waterways and the benefits that brings around water quality. So there's a big focus in the plan on that going forward. I won't touch too much on those. Obviously, with the change that was approved recently to bring maintenance services in-house, we'll have a very strong focus on minimising emissions with all of our operational activities and finding the right balance. It's a balance between technology that's available and what's not available. So it doesn't mean we're necessarily going to be able to go entirely electric initially, but we're putting together a program of what that looks like, what's available on the market. It is an area that's evolving reasonably quickly, but in the world we work in, things like tractors and so forth are not there yet. So we just need to set a realistic expectation around that. But we'll be looking at a 10-year plan for what that might look like. Guardians of our natural environment and taonga, probably goes without saying. But that's not without challenges. There's a lot of really amazing work going on across all of our teams, and in particular The most obvious is in the regional park space. And this is something that I guess I would encourage councillors to try and grapple with. You can put a limitless amount of energy into that, and it costs. You know, when I get the questions often about, you know, could you do with more rangers? Well, the honest answer is, of course you could, but we have to find a balance because it all costs. So what we're really focused on is the resource that we've got, making that resource as efficient as it can possibly be. And we still have a bit of work to go in that space of making sure everything that we do is the best way to deliver those outcomes. And one of the best ways to deliver those outcomes is leverage the public. And that's where our focus is. So it doesn't mean that we have to have all the staff. What we need are the tools to leverage the wider community to get involved. And the team does a fantastic job with volunteer input, but it's by no means at an optimal level. So we're just really probably 3 years into the journey of driving that forward. Planning for future impacts, regulation and reform over there on the right-hand side is something we have to keep a very close eye on, obviously. There are a lot of policy statements coming out of the Crown at the moment that will impact on our legally what we have to do. It'll impact our capital programs as well as our operational programs. That's probably the one I wanted to call out the most there. I've already talked about equity and access. That's a key focus for our planners. Population and demographic changes are obviously not happening particularly quickly. So growth's, you know, not massive. It's more the change within, particularly around housing and intensification, that we need to focus on, certainly in the shorter term. Climate change and adaptation, and now this is going to be quite a challenging space for everyone, including you guys as councillors and the community boards that you work with as well. How does that manifest itself? Well, if you look at how parks, at those 1,300 parks, but if I focus on the community parks, if you think about how did those parks arise, they all came through the same process that's occurring where we've got development going on at the moment, say Horswell, for example, where a developer sets up a subdivision, sets aside some land for the community and puts a playground in it and plonks a whole lot of stuff in it to make it look cool to sell. So we've had generations on generations on generations of development like that, to the point that we've literally got playgrounds 300 meters from another playground, and they're both, excuse the language, but they're not particularly good, they're crap. So we've accumulated a massive amount of asset that the vast majority of it is in pretty average functional condition, that kind of looks a bit old. You know, we slap paint on it to try and keep it fresh and that sort of thing. But going forward, we have to start thinking about letting go of some of that asset, quality, not quantity, within communities. And that's going to be a big challenge for people and elected members to let go of some things, that we cannot afford to hold on to everything, that we should be focused on concentrating, optimizing, and creating better, lower maintenance drivers, and really looking at a catchment by catchment basis. So that's where we want to go with our planning. But this is a partnership with community boards, frankly, because you're the decision makers. So it's not going to be done in a random way. It's going to be done in a carefully planned way. And I know that no one wants to let anything go, but we need to be able to afford to provide the right assets to the communities, particularly in those areas that are intensifying. So there's some of the biggest challenges that we're all going to have going forward. The alternative to that is to have me keep coming in here and asking for more OPEX as it keeps growing and growing and growing and growing in terms of quantity, or lowering the level of service that we can apply. And you can only go so far before you start having to get to a critical, well, it's not safe, it's not functional, it's got to come out anyway. Now, our capital investment program plays a big part in that, so that we invest smart. And again, I'm going to focus on less can be more for a community. Less volume can be more in terms of what we can deliver in terms of an outcome. So like all the other big infrastructure parts of the organisation, like transport and water, sweating the asset is the key risk. We've got a lot of stuff that we struggle to look after. It's not as critical, obviously, as the water coming out of the pipe. And we can make decisions about what can stay in a park and what can't. But at some point, we're going to have to think about doing this differently, unless we want to keep putting the rates up accordingly. I'm going to stop at that point and I'm just going to focus on some sort of talking points across this activity that I put together. Some of the challenges in a bit more detail, if that's okay, or do you want me to stop now for any key questions?
Sorry, we have got a handful of questions if you want to get not rid of those.
If it's based on the material I just talked about, why don't we deal with that now?
Yep, based on the material we just talked about. Jake, it's all four of them in a row. Jake, 5, yeah.
In order. Glyphosate, will we get the opportunity as part of this next LTP to relook at that again with some advice about what the consequences of using alternatives are? And secondly, related to that question, do you know that not using glyphosate has simply just cost us extra, or have we has it cost us extra, but we've also dropped down maintenance in order to, lessen the impact?
Yeah, no, I read the article. It's not entirely factual.
That's why I said with advice.
Yeah. So when council made a decision, crikey,
2020. Twice.
I think they made it twice, but the initial decision was made some years ago.
Yeah, I think it was
for parks and, well, for the council actually, and glyphosate was removed from parks. The budget was adjusted accordingly, and that was applied to this current contract. So no, it didn't create cuts, is the straight answer to that. Yeah.
You've missed off a bit though. Will we get the opportunity to relook at that with advice as part of the LTP?
Relook at it in terms of reintroducing it, or it's not on my radar because no one's requested it, but
someone could.
Someone could.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
In terms of how we intend to go forward post 24 internally, we want to move fairly quickly to a highly vegetated, minimal, not use alternatives. We don't want to use pesticides in parks. So we'd rather go to a product which eliminates them altogether. Now, you can't eliminate it entirely because there are pest plants that we are legally required to deal with. But we can certainly, we're already talking internally in our team about how we move in that direction without increased OPEX costs. Yeah. So more than happy to come back with more detail if that's required.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, interested in what you had to say, Andrew, about say reducing the number of playgrounds and parks and things like that we have, concentrating on quality over quantity. Jake and I were just talking about, is there a mechanism whereby if you took something away from a community that you could earmark that money, circle it for another initiative nearby, even if it's,
Well, that's what I mean by optimizing. You're not taking something away from a community. You're essentially saying, well, I've got 4 playgrounds This house has access to 4 playgrounds when it really should have access to 1 playground of a much higher quality. And that drives our operating and maintenance costs down. And there's lots and lots of examples across the city where that's the case. I'm not suggesting we're going to run around and take all the playgrounds out.
Sure.
What I'm saying is that we've really got to be sensible about access, quality, because we can't afford to upgrade every single playground in the city that we have right now, so we're sweating the asset, and that only goes in one direction.
Yeah, no, we get that. We're just talking about,
That's what I mean by
communicate
optimizing. It's a spatially driven sort of planning approach.
If you communicate that to the local residents, they're much more likely to understand it. And
This isn't something we're going to start doing. This is something that will come from a plan, a bit like the urban forest plan, that will be developed, consulted on, and then back to council for adoption.
Okay, and the other question I had was just around volunteers. I mean, I see this as a massive opportunity for us. I live next to a lake that various people are, a retention pond that various people are doing plantings and looking after, in the absence of council staff spending a lot of time there themselves. How do you propose to do that? Because I know you have, there are people out there, rangers out there. I just think it's a massive untapped resource.
Managing volunteers takes energy and takes resource. The opportunity that's in front of us within housing creates an opportunity for the jobs that the people that we employ, that becomes part of their job. So, it's a little pyramid scheme really, where you have one person talks to 2 people who can, etc. So that's the opportunity that's in front of us. And that's the real key change. It also links to the stuff that Jake was asking me about, well, how do you move away from using pesticides? Well, you do things differently. You create an environment where weeds can't thrive. So you need people to do that. And that's where the volunteers can come into it as well.
Thanks.
Okay, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Along those lines, with regards to the changing face of parks, I think 2 examples which would be really good are Ruskin and Harmon Street. It's the Cornelius O'Connor Reserve. We put a community house in there because it wasn't used by the community, but now we've had all that infill, and we've now got community there, and we've got it. You upgraded the park, the playground there. That's now being used because it's seen as a safe space. Whereas 6-7 years ago, it was seen as no one would use it because it was seen as an issue. And Ruskin Street Reserve, where we had waterways, we've opened them and changed them. You bought a couple of sections, so and in that area the infill is insane. So there are a couple of really. So I can understand sacrificing something to get something that's actually used.
I think it's the principle that Andrew's really airing here, which is important, because that aspect of what does today's generation regard as play, and the quality when you've got a lot of asset that is just pepper potted everywhere.
I think with regards to this,
the opportunity,
the Ruskin Street one is actually what you could look at that now and say that is actually the future, because that area is so intensified, and you're going to be looking at Waltham and other areas. So that's a really good example, I think, of being clever. So thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Andrew. I heard you use the phrase sweating the asset a couple of times today. I was at an infrastructure event last night, and we had an expert panel, and that was something that they talked about, and the general feeling was that we didn't sweat the asset enough. And I wondered what you thought about that, and whether you could identify legitimately some assets that we could sweat. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, in terms of what you see in a park, it's pretty typical. Your grass, pathways, etc., etc. Playgrounds are the ones that we're probably sweating the most. But we're also looking at it in the sense of, fundamentally, a lot of the structure is actually okay. It just looks a bit boring and tired, So there's nothing wrong with sweating the assets. But ultimately, the more asset you have, the more it costs. So sweating a park's asset is not like sweating street asset or a water asset because of the criticality and because we can see it and because we can do simple things. I don't have a problem with sweating our assets. I guess the issue I'm trying to raise is through the development cycles, arguably we've ended up with too much or too much in the wrong places and not enough elsewhere. And so we need to change that model. That's really what I'm talking about.
So on the basis of that, then going into this long-term plan, can we expect that you won't be coming to us with your hand out asking for more funds and that you will be looking for a way to work within your current budget envelope and prioritising? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. But no, our focus is entirely, I'll touch on a couple of points that it will expand a little bit, but our focus is entirely on, from an OPEX perspective, absolutely trying to gain efficiencies with the OPEX funding that we have. The capital program is slightly different, where we feel that some sensible investment is going to improve that long-term picture. I think if we can isolate OPEX and CAPEX for the discussion, but at this point, no, we're not intending to come in here and ask for more OPEX to deliver what we're already delivering. A very good question.
Pauline?
Yeah, look, I think this is really interesting discussion. And I mean, if you're talking about pulling back on playground renewals, that's tricky as well. And I think that does come down to a governance decision around the table, because these are really, really important facilities for communities. And some little parks might have two wee things in there, but they really serve the community around them. So whether or not we require more budget will be a governance decision on what weight we put on those facilities for our communities. And also touching on Kelly's point about volunteering, you know, how can we enable this volunteering to be more readily accessible? How can people get involved? Do we need to put resource into some sort of a campaign? Do we need a dedicated team in here who actually, you know, work with the volunteers and build the program up, because we know the financial benefit is immense from that. So I don't know if you got that in here at the moment, or do you need anything to get that going?
Yeah, sure. I guess there's two aspects to that. Just so I'm clear, I'm not talking about taking people's playgrounds away.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about ensuring that the right play equipment is available to people. So yes, we might have little bits here and little bits there. That's part of the problem in terms of managing and maintaining those little playgrounds. They all have to meet a minimum health and safety standard. We have to assess them every year and so forth. We're talking about concentrating and optimizing and making those play spaces more valuable in terms of what you can get out of one space versus out of three small spaces that are still within the catchment.
That was my point.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Secondly, you've already, the decision you made at Finance and Performance to in-house full services, you've already enabled that future development of accessing more volunteers.
Yeah, through the
we talked in that meeting about having community-based teams.
Yeah.
And they are the people that we can make part of the role is to harness volunteer support to work with them. I mean, there's lots of it going on already. But by adding essentially, you know, quite a lot more staff, we will be able to enable them more with what we've already made a decision about.
Okay, so you're confident with that process.
In terms of communication, yes, we can do more, we can do it better, but we don't need more resource to do that.
Great, okay. And probably working through the community boards is the way there too. And the other thing too is, of course, looking back at, and we're talking about green spaces in intensified areas. So we might call them pocket parks. They might be the equivalent of one or two old sections. Pack Street Park is the classic example where I think council mows the grass and that's about it. And the community has taken charge of that, and that's a really good model. And the other model that was good, I think Thames council up there had a community project where they built a playground themselves. The community built it, so that sort of thing. So it's actually getting communities to take charge of things, and we might just oversee things for health and safety.
Yep.
But I think we're moving in that direction. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
I couldn't
Andrew.
agree more.
Okay, my turn. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so shall I carry on with a few other points?
No, there's a few.
Oh,
a few
there's more.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
But
wait, there's
I'd
more.
just like to say this very realistic and clear presentation is really good. But just looking at, say, you've got 3 pocket parks within 300 or 400 meters, and I know what you said, you're not going to sell any parks, and I know how hard it is to sell a reserve. Are we better if we're trying to get tree canopy up and say, right, park number 1, we'll just fill it up with trees and just have a path going through the middle of it? Will that save you a lot of OPEX going forward once they grow?
Absolutely. And it was one of the things I was going to talk about that has to be, it's part of the shift. We need naturalization, if you like, for want of a better phrase, is really a critical part for a whole lot of these reasons, climatic, all the urban values I was talking about, and cost management. Implementing the urban forest is the most important thing that this council can do for the future residents of the city. And what I want to emphasize with that is the decisions that you guys are making now are they're not for us. They're for 50 years time. They're for the future generations. The most critical thing we can do is implement that urban forest plan. It will change the nature of our parks over time. It's not happening. Trees don't grow overnight. And what that's going to do is it's going to dramatically reduce the maintenance costs of the land that we hold.
Exactly.
Dramatically. And so I can't emphasize enough sort of the next sort of 2 to 3 councils sitting around this table driving that program is setting up the future of the city. But in terms of all of those well-beings that come from that, it's a really critical thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Andre, you had your hand up and you took it down. You still got something to say, buddy?
No, I'm all good. Sorry, I will just add, probably one of our best maintained parks is the one that's maintained by volunteers. It's absolutely brilliant. So anything we can do to enable that, fully support. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. Sam and then Melanie.
Oh yeah, just 2 really quick ones. Just around and kick me if I'm on the wrong path here, or if it's relevant later on. If we're thinking about the assets within the parks, for example, like the playgrounds and things like that, and given we have so many of them, is there an ability for us to front load capital to reduce OPEX, to kind of go, actually, these 30 parks all need a new, what do you call them, slide or a swing, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Is there an ability to go, actually, we front load that and that saves us? Like, is the maintenance around the asset in the park, or is it the grass in the park?
Well, it's a combination. It's no one thing. It's a combination of things, of course. But yeah, look, it's really important though that it's carefully planned, because if you can't plan it, you can't communicate it, and if we don't communicate it, you're going to get the shock reaction. You're taking my stuff away. I don't want that. So yes, we need to make sure that the capital program has sufficient funding over the 10-year profile to enable that. But I don't think it's as simple as front loading it as such. It's making sure that we've got access to adequate capital, that when we do renew playgrounds, and I'll just make this up, we take 2 out to put 1 really cool one in, that achieves the goals that we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. And just the only other one is there anything in these activity plans that you think is enabling you to implement that urban forest plan? So is there anything you think we could do to enable that to move quicker, or be less restrictive? Or
look, I think that the key thing is making the decisions when the plans come to you.
Okay.
Because they take a long time to grow. So every delay is a delay to that outcome. It's a delay to the decreasing demand for OPEX.
So there's nothing in here that you think's hindering what you need to be able to do from your
not at
team's
this
point of
point.
view?
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you,
Melanie.
What you talked about with the playgrounds, and if you were to reduce the number, to me, what would make sense from what people have said is that well, the question is, do you think that other infrastructure would need to go in, like in the roading space, for instance? Because I have parents who they'll say, well, we haven't got a park close by, and I'll say, well, there is still one just over there, but then they're too scared about the kids crossing a major road to get to it.
Yep.
So that requires infrastructure in the transport space,
Yep.
which is then spending there rather than maintaining a park
Sure.
here and crossing.
Yep.
So getting comments on that. Any good
Well, that really just emphasises how critical sensible planning is. And when we do planning, we do look at physical barriers. When we start looking at catchments, there's some. Bruce Rendell sort of approached us recently about some potential land in the Addington area, and so we had a really good look at what are the physical barriers. Where are the existing parks, and you must. That's a critical part of making the decisions. What we really need to emphasise though is we're not talking about taking away the capacity for play or the outcome of play. When we shouldn't focus on we're removing playgrounds. We won't remove the overall outcome. In fact, we'll enhance the overall outcome. The play will be better because at the moment, everybody gets a Morris Minor because it's about that era. If anyone remembers a Morris Minor, that was my very first car.
That doesn't surprise
$250. Everybody's got a Morris Minor except a few new ones that have popped up. So do we want to keep changing the spark plugs in the Morris Minor, or do we want to lift the game a little bit is really what we're talking about.
Very good.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Nothing wrong with a Morris Minor, by the way. It's my first car.
couple of oddly it was mine. Mine was the van version, so that was that. See you laughing as well, Dawn. Thank you.
I nearly said, of course it was.
Yeah, was yours?
No.
Right.
I have a Mini. I'm not. That was my thing.
Bill stole part of the glory on that one. So to confirm, it is cheaper to run a park that's just all native bush. Longer term.
Not necessarily native, and the urban forest plan is quite clear that there's certainly dynamics that we'd like to achieve overall to get a balanced kind of ecosystem. That's why I use the phrase naturalization more than ecological restoration. I mean, we're very clear around waterways and so forth. There'll be native species that'll be dominant, but it's also very clear that it's very balanced.
But with that is that we need there's two things. One is that all the complaints we seem to get about trees and the ones people want cut down are non-natives. They're always the deciduous and all the rubbish and everything that comes with them. Whereas the natives, yes, they do drop, but they spread it over the year. They're sneaky and they drop it and you don't notice, like your beautiful beech tree and stuff like that. Yeah. So you got those, but then there's the bird song. That if we increase our natives, we increase our native bird species. So I thought that would affect that. And people love those little native bushwalks that we have. So the question around that is, because our board is keen to explore ditching some parks and switching them to pockets of native bush and things, including the fire brigade have come and seen us about planting a non-flammable park and doing all the work themselves. How do we speed that up? How do we embrace that? Just give them a green light.
It depends which bit you're talking about. If the board want to see a particular direction in their community, that's those conversations when we come to you for the which parks would you like to see looked at next for the urban forest. The firefighter one's a really simple one. It's just,
and that you've been shown that already.
I'm not sure if I have, but someone probably has. Yeah,
because that's a simple one. They want to do a demonstration park and do all the work themselves. So it's a real no, and I'm sure they can water them too. Then the other one is I've never seen an audit of our playground equipment versus other numbers. We've probably got more playground equipment per child in this city than almost any city in the world, but that would only be an uneducated guess. But when I go through places like New York and that, and you see their parks and they are just jammed full of kids because there's one every 4 blocks. So there's one for every 80,000 people. And we've got over 1,000. So have we ever done that?
I don't know the straight answer to that. You got to be a bit careful that, per person. It's about access.
Yeah.
It's about where it is and can they access it, which is again just emphasises why it needs to be done in a carefully planned, thought out way. And I'm not talking about this is going to happen overnight. This is just as a direction we want to go in the next long-term plan. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I think we should be saying to the public that, well, this is our current level of service. We have this many. Is that the ultimate use? Because you can drive past a lot of parks and see them hardly used a lot of the time, and then other parks are very well used because they're like one of the best parks in the city is Bishopdale Park. It's in my ward. There's certain things that you wouldn't even build now, but heaven forbid you try and take them out. You watch the demonstrations. And you know the items I mean. There's the elephant slide.
Yes, I do.
Granddad's axe, and then the flying fox and the slide and things like they're amazing.
Thanks, Aaron. We're running out of time. Got Sarah, please.
Thanks. Hey, listen. I see we've got there's a level of service for the distance that people might walk to community parks and those kind of things, and it's being rewritten. Do we have a current one on playground equipment?
Not listed, and I guess what I'm
so just
very
that we're not
broadly
having to change the level
signalling
of service
is that we need to look at levels of service in a slightly different way than simple metrics like a park is a minimum of 3,000 meters. This must be within a certain distance.
Yeah, I'm just checking so that we don't currently have one that needs altering for equipment.
No, well, it's written in there that essentially you can access a park and it'll have these things within a certain distance. It's not lit.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a management one.
Yeah, I'm just like concerned because lots of especially as we intensify and you've got more families with less space, they're going to want something, especially if you've got a couple of small kids. Walking them too far is not the easiest thing.
No.
So yeah, so that's there.
So I think what you're signaling is as we go through this planning, and I think I'm saying the same thing, we've got to get away from distance, and there's probably more about, as Aaron mentioned, the metrics around population and density.
Except that when it comes to parents with small children, distance is actually quite important. So we need to have that conversation with the community. So is this leading to, the what we were doing years ago, the playground equipment plan for the city? Like
there's some early work's been done on
because they got put off a while ago because we were doing it.
But we're going to focus on this for the next long-term plan.
Yeah. So this is what's being looked at in the plan. Is this being specifically consulted on?
Nothing. No, we haven't.
Or do we do?
We haven't substantively started this work.
Okay.
I'm signaling what we're looking at in the next long-term plan. Yeah.
So you're looking at doing that and bringing a consultation document?
Absolutely. Going through a normal planning process.
Okay, that's cool.
Yep. Sorry. Yep.
We've got Andre and Yanni, but we're running out of time. But we've got two more.
We have.
We've got Heritage and OARC. So that if Yanni and Andre could please put their.
Sure. Look, I'll just touch on what I haven't covered so far about parks and foreshore. So Te Kaha is coming on stream. And for us, that means around September 2025, at this stage, we'll be putting staff into that environment, start the process of looking after the turf and so forth. My understanding, I know Peter's in the room, put him on the spot. My understanding is there is budget foreseen in the last long-term plan for Te Kaha coming on stream. So it's not essentially asking for more, I don't believe. Yep, I'm pretty sure that was the case. So it was foreseen, but there'll be a bit of a change. We will deliver that urban environment, the surrounds, and also the activity on the turf, just as we do at Orange Theory now. I've covered pretty much everything there. Yep. And I'll just touch on it. And when we come back to talk about CapEx, there are three key things that we're looking at. Locking in the urban forest once the Crown's Better Off funding runs out. Shortly, in fact, on the 29th of August, we will be briefing council on the sports field network plan and what that looks like. And then there's the other key thing is the Takapaniki investment over the next 7 years. So they're the three sort of key initiatives that we want to discuss with you going forward. Okay. The next two should be relatively quick, but if there's any more questions about parks and foreshore, it'd be quite good to cover them off now.
You're running desperately behind time, but we've got to be out of here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so you're right. So good. Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't realise it had been shortened. Okay.
We had a lot of questions. They're all good questions. Don't worry.
So, what have we got here? Whoop. Heritage. There we are. Thank you.
The end of the activity plan before you ask for questions, please.
Absolutely. We don't have that same second slide. So Parks is responsible for managing council-owned heritage, public monuments and artworks. So that's part of our portfolio. We don't look after the heritage grants and so forth. That's John Higgins. So we're talking about this building structures and monuments that we own. Essentially, the program has been, I guess, in a strange and ironic way, the earthquakes have created an opportunity to restore a lot of these buildings over the last 10 years. We're getting to the end of that program now. The one exception to that, of course, is provincial chambers. That is a significant investment if council is going to fund everything. We will continue to, well, in fact, we'll ramp up the opportunity to talk to the Crown and any other agency around how that might be able to be funded. So we have not got in the draft plan when we're building the capital program, $120 million estimate that was put together quite a few years ago now in that plan. There's about 25 million on budget for the first stage, which is the sort of clock tower wooden buildings. And I guess that's a big decision for council in this plan is, do you want to put more money somewhere on the plan in the future or not for the provincial chambers at this point in time? The other thing that in terms of challenges we have is restoring buildings, heritage buildings, are obviously very, very expensive. And there's some really obvious ones that you must do. But we're sort of getting now to the point that there's some of the heritage buildings out in the community. I think we need a better mechanism to enable boards to make smart decisions about how we acknowledge that heritage. Whether or not restoring, a small house, which is not a listed heritage item, but it has heritage value, is the right level of expenditure versus acknowledging that heritage in a different way with displays and so forth. And the reason I say that is, even a simple house, there's one in particular on my mind, the estimate to restore it, and it's a modest bungalow, is getting up around $700,000. Now they must be tenanted, otherwise they deteriorate quickly. And so we need to work on a mechanism to enable decision makers like yourselves to make smart and sensible decisions about how we manage some of the it's not the right choice of language, and I apologize to my heritage colleagues, but things that could be considered slightly marginal in terms of the value, but we still want to acknowledge the heritage somehow and capture that. So I think we need to work in that space over the next few years, because we're virtually at the end of our program of restoring all the listed heritage items. We have a really modest budget to manage all of the heritage, all of the public monuments and public art. It's $370,000 per annum. Now it's enough when those buildings are actively tenanted and all of those responsibilities primarily lie with the tenant. But that's a big work on for us in the future. I think we've got to be quite, we parks have to come up with a solid plan of what that might look like going forward. So most of the capital is obviously being spent on McDougall in the short term, and then finishing off some of the more community-based heritage items that we have at the moment. There wasn't too much more that I wanted to bring up. So if there's any questions on that one.
Sarah, did you have a question? No. Yanni?
I just want to use the Kerry and Lou example, like with the Monavale Gatehouse. That was incredible, that investment that we made, and then using the heritage building as a sort of attraction. So I guess I'm kind of interested in how do we, and I know we've done that with the YHA building as well.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm really interested in how we can look at those sorts of unique partnerships to both restore the heritage, but then also to have a good use for it.
We continue to do that. The Monavale Bathhouse, we've just had a contribution from the Friends of the Botanic Gardens to initiate that and bring that program forward. I mean, we're always looking at ways to partner with heritage buildings. The Gatehouse was something that council fully funded, but we used it as a means to generate a little bit of revenue. I don't think there's any question that everyone wants to retain the heritage listed. What I was suggesting there was how do we manage the non-heritage listed but have heritage value? And so just to reiterate, we're nearly at the end of the redevelopment of those buildings, the heritage listed.
Even for the non-listed heritage ones, which, you know, maybe character or have a social significance.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, like, for example, the caretaker's cottage at Woodham Park.
Yep.
You know, I don't know if it's a heritage listed building, but it's a house that could be viable for people to live in, create artwork.
That's a really good example.
Parks, do whatever, but it's just been left languishing for like 15 years, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good example, and it's been languishing because we've had to get through the more critical heritage listed stuff first. It's not heritage listed, it's in a heritage setting. It's considered by our heritage colleagues to have heritage characters that they'd like to retain. But as a house, it's going to cost about $800,000 of capital that you're never going to get back from rent. So that's what I mean about we need to give the decision makers better tools to make the decisions. We've got to work on that internally to enable decision makers to go, right, what's the best way to acknowledge this heritage? Is it to restore the house? It could be. Or is it to do it in a different way? Yeah. And we'll look at all the factors like the revenue that you'll get from rent and so forth. Yeah.
More is around our art strategy, around our new contracts with parks, you know, what we do internally to make sure that we use that space, not just with the idea of external people using it, but other things that we can do that create better value, right?
But sorry, just right, Andrew, you spend 800 grand on something that's...
No, we haven't spent...
No, you haven't, but it could. We can spend $1 to save
I was
50
using that
cents.
as an example that I guess to articulate that staff need to give decision makers better tools.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sam.
So I'm not disagreeing with anything. I'm
But
just
it probably
saying we
would
need
have
to...
cost 100 grand to fix if we just fixed it straight away and got someone living in it.
Well, that's actually
So just to benefit.
100 to 800. It doesn't work like that, Yanni. You know
It's been vandalised and people have kicked the shit out of it and deteriorated and been left unmaintained for 10 years, which does a lot of damage.
You don't need to exaggerate things all the time for the negative.
So
just saying.
No, but
members,
it's a basic wooden house.
the issue here is the principle that Andrew is describing,
Wooden
and
Park.
it is
I'll take you
our
through it. Have a look.
responsibility to bring you options. You're not determining the outcome today, and ultimately you'll do your governance work when you get to the budget, and you will either say yes, we agree, or no,
And
you
we
don't,
won't.
or you'll change it.
And then we'll move on.
But we are signalling an approach that we think is a sensible thing to be doing
Very sensible. Yeah.
in terms of the principle, not the individual example, but a good example to describe, Andrew. Thank you.
Sam, please.
Don't worry about my
You all
question.
done, Sam? Right, carry on, Andrew. Have you got one? Yes, please.
there anyone that doesn't understand what the planning it's not the entire rezone, it's only the Ataparo taking over the title, essentially from
Mike, please.
through to
Mike.
Thank you. Sorry, it's essentially from Barbados Street, following the river around and out to the Uatai estuary. It was put together not at the last long-term plan time, but a year later, to acknowledge that it was a significant piece of land. It was a significant initiative, and there were 3 units at the time that had funding allocated to work in that area, and it was to define and capture. The public were quite keen to see what council were going to do in that area. Staff have sort of been asking questions of themselves as to whether or not this plan still needs to be an activity plan, because all of the elements in the funding already sits out in the transport, Three Waters and parks plan. And so we're sort of spending time and energy and effort creating a plan that's an overarching view, which can be done elsewhere. And it's really been brought into focus with the potential for Three Waters reform. So the waters element could leave. Transport really doesn't have a lot of skin in the game anymore. Pages Road is progressing on its own right. The cycleway is not going to be using the corridor by all accounts at this stage. And even if it does, it's a relatively minor element. We work collaboratively anyway. We have a steering group. In fact, there's a meeting this afternoon. It's really whether or not we need to have an activity plan as such. I guess the staff's position is it's not required, but that's not our decision. In terms of what we're doing, we're progressing the capital programs for all of the activities that are currently in the plan. And we're working with, and Kelly's aware of this, working with the Co-Governance Establishment Committee. We've developed a decision-making framework for future initiatives that doesn't impact the current, and also working on what that enduring entity might look like. And that's a work in progress. Quite a complex piece of work that thankfully I've got Mary driving to help out, because that's her space, and I'd be lost without her. But that's progressing on its own pathway anyway. So that's really, if there's any feedback on that right now, that would be quite helpful for us.
So we've got 2 questions, Tyler and then Sarah.
Okay, Andrew, how are you? I've just got a question on agenda page 47 around levels of service changes from the long-term plan, 6.4.2.2, which is range of intimate options provided to meet diverse religious, cultural and community needs. 80% of preferred intimate options met. The rationale was having a range of intimate options is important to meet community needs, but we have no way of knowing all preferences and if they are being met. So just to be clear, are you scrapping this level of service around providing options for cultural groups? Sorry, proposing to.
I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. Sorry. For cultural groups.
Well, there's obviously the
Interment options.
Beg your pardon? Sorry.
Yeah, there's a level of service change, and it says to delete that from the 2021-31 LTP, which is actually, if you just look at page 47, I just want some clarification on 6.4.2.2 around the interment options.
This is in the Otakaro plan?
Sorry, in the agenda.
Is it in the Parks and
Oh,
Foreshore?
can you,
plan?
oh, sorry, yeah, it's nothing to do with Otakaro because we moved on to that.
Okay. I'll put it through the office.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, if you've sent it through, I'll be able to send the response out. Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, share it, please.
So with the Avanatakaro River Corridor, what's currently an activity management plan,
Yes.
what is your suggestion for replacing that so that we get visibility of the corridor as a whole that's integrated and not siloed just in those different areas?
In briefing.
So, yeah.
To
because
include
whole
the
point of
Uatai, the entire Uatai, is that what you're meaning? Or
yeah, but for the river corridor. So what's the way that we have visibility? So the suggestion originally was to put it into an activity management plan so we could see it as a
explicitly,
whole, rather than just getting bits and pieces here and there through different spaces. So
I guess what we're suggesting is that the activity that's occurring in that plan also occurs in regional parks and various other things, that there'd be an explicit section within the Parks and Foreshore plan for the parks elements. The Three Waters activities are essentially, as it stands at the moment, going to leave council anyway.
Not within the lifetime of this LTP. With the 3 years.
Yes, but no later than 2026.
Yeah, so yeah.
So Andrew, if I can
couple
help
of
you,
years at
'cause
least.
I think Sarah's question is not dissimilar to the one we had in ELT, which is the practicality of merging the activity plans we didn't have a problem with on the basis that the working group, which is all of the departments together under Andrew in terms of delivering the corridor works, actually still continues, and you would still need to brief elected members about the totality of what is being delivered. It's just that rather than having an additional activity plan, making sure that's explicit in the individual activity plans, that was all. But you would continue to have a comprehensive briefing of the whole.
But how do the public have a large interest in the space as well? And so how do the public see the holistic work that's going on in that space? So I do get questions from people going, oh, what's happening with the red zone? And I'm like, I guess, lots, but
I guess
there's
that's
no sort of space to see that for the public.
So I guess that's the real question. And in fact, in the conversation at the ELT, it was suggested that we can still have quite a clear statement in the long-term plan about the activity and where to find it in the plan. Essentially, in the parks and foreshore area and Three Waters. I guess it's that question that if Three Waters progresses the way it's proposed at the moment, the only thing that's going to remain in council will be the parks and foreshore work and transport, which is essentially the Pages Road project.
I think that given the state of, the country at the moment, I don't think that we should be banking on waters leaving us anytime soon. It's I think we need to be planning. The thing is, we've said all along that we will plan for either eventuality, right? And I think we need to plan for either eventuality. So I think that
look, we're happy to leave it as is, but if it does proceed the way it's planned at the moment, at some point we're going to have to take it away.
Yeah. I mean, it's there already. I don't think there's any harm in leaving it there until the next LTP, maybe.
And look, before we adopt the plan, in fact, before we even go out for consultation,
we'll know.
There'll be more clarity.
Okay, Yanni, please.
Thank you. I mean, I actually like the idea of these activities having their own management plan. And I thought we'd also ask for some work to happen around the Apauho Heathcote having a sort of activity management plan as well. So, my preference would be to highlight the visibility through the LTP process of having these areas highlighted. But I don't know if people remember, but when the Littleton Whakarapo group comes in, every LTP, every annual plan complaining that things aren't happening, work isn't being done, and actually, generally we find staff are actually working on stuff, but people were kind of struggling to understand the budget decisions versus the activity decisions. So I guess just the feedback that I would give is actually, I think having a discrete activity management plan for a number of these important river parks corridors, I think are really important. And I think it's a positive step forward to bring all the works together and be able to show people clearly what's proposed to happen. So that's just my feedback.
Very good, thank you. Andrew, have you got anything else?
No, that's essentially it. There's no changes proposed, by the way, to the current funding regimes in both capital and OPEX.
Thank you very much. Okay, good.
That's me.
It's an excellent presentation.
Yeah, it was very, very good presentation. Thank you very much. Yeah, nice, very, as I say, realistic and clear. So we finished a wee bit earlier. Do we want to have our cup of tea now? Okay.
Ask the questions. Ask the questions.
Ask questions of Andrew. Sorry, Andrew.
Sit back down.
This
Sit
question, I
back down.
thought we'd come to the end of questions.
So can I suggest you do so? Then it saves us having to send them through a system and then replies. Just get them out there. Tyler. Depends if you can find the specific thing that he was referring to.
Thanks, Dawn.
That's all right, Tyler.
Okay, so who else? Sorry.
Look at this radio.
Who else has got questions? Gianni, you got another one? And Sarah?
Andre, you had a list of two of us who were going to ask questions. We were told to put them
Do you
through.
want to finish with Tyler?
Andre and myself and Tyler.
Yeah, I thought Tyler was going to put his one towards.
But he could have, it hopefully
Andre.
might be able to be answered.
Andre.
Sorry,
Okay, so
Andrew.
No, Andre.
stop. We'll go back to Tyler, and you go for your life, matey.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. It's just on referring to page 47 on the agenda.
So it's in the actual activity plan, Andrew.
It is, yeah. Apologies.
47.
Yeah, of our agenda. It's A3 levels of service changes from the long-term plan, and why?
I'm not sure I'm looking at the same thing, sorry.
Where can we find this?
Okay.
So on our agenda, it's page 47.
Pauline's just showing it to Andrew.
Cool, thanks.
Which one was it? Sorry.
About the interment.
On the interment.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what that means.
What was deleted?
So the existing level of service, I guess, was an acknowledgement that our current cemeteries master plan associated operational plan doesn't effectively acknowledge the changing dynamics around different cultures and how they want to acknowledge their loved ones once they've passed.
Yeah.
And we just felt that putting a number like 80% on it kind of meant it was okay for not, you know, to upset a whole lot of people, that we need to do some work in that space, that measurement wasn't a good measurement. That's why it's taken out. It doesn't mean we're not going to have a measurement.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, we just felt it was a little bit blunt and less aligned to how we want to work, which is in partnership with people.
Yeah, no, that's all good. It makes it clear. Appreciate that, Andrew. Cheers.
Does that also apply to the biodiversity one above there?
Are you pushing in?
Yeah. So it's not, you're not cutting the program, it's just about the measurement.
A lot of the changes that the guys have been looking at are coming up with better means to measure and actually acknowledge. Some of these things are just too hard to measure. They don't have clear metrics.
Throwing a number at it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, no, it
It
doesn't.
needs to be meaningful and real.
So it's just about the measurement, not at the project itself.
Oh yeah, no, it's not about stopping the work. No, definitely.
Okay.
Not. Yeah.
Thanks,
Best
Tyler.
answer to
Sarah,
that.
please.
So can I just check though? So some of the levels of service here that are planned to be either changed or deleted have proposed changes.
Yes.
These ones on page 47 are planned to be deleted, so we won't be reporting on any kind of measurement. Can we
No,
I
we're
said,
not-
I might just
yeah.
send through a thing saying, can we reword it so it's measurable so that we know that we're doing it?
Yeah.
If that makes
Yeah.
sense, rather than just deleting it completely.
So the challenge we've got, because we've got so many activities, we've got frankly a ridiculous number of measurables. And what we've focused on changing or eliminating are those that can be measured better or differently, or already being measured in another way. So we've got to have
Yeah.
slightly less and more meaningful ones.
So can we then, when we send these ones through that we've got concerns about,
Yep.
can we get a response that says
Absolutely.
how they will be measured?
Do you fire
and
them through the
reported?
question?
Yep.
Yeah. And we can respond to how we're going to carry on. Yep.
So before you go to your next set of questions, and it's absolutely right, Sarah, in scripture in terms of this individual element, but if I bring us up to the big picture, we have over 500 measures of levels of service and management measures, many of which are input models that aren't meaningful enough to have anything to do with impact. So we do need at some point through our joint development work to step out of the activity plans and actually have a full session on levels of service in totality and what really is important to communities, to elected members and to staff, and what we should be measuring that genuinely gives impact and value, rather than just measuring a whole raft of things because everybody just wants to put an extra one in. Yeah.
Okay.
That it needs to be a full conversation about the whole,
Right.
not taking away the question that you've been asked, Andrew.
Yanni, please.
So just to be clear, we'll get the presentation on the sports plan next week.
29th, yeah.
And then we'll be able to come back and look at the LTP activity management plan.
Yeah, it'll flow. I mean, the process for that will be a briefing. Then you'll get a lot more detail about how we've been developing it and who with. Then it'll go through its consultative processes, adoption and so forth.
Right. So is there CapEx to support what's in that draft?
Yeah, and you'll see it's CapEx has been built into our draft program, but it's essentially being considered a new bid because it's not existing. And you'll see more detail of that in the presentation.
Right. Okay. Just some very specific questions. One is the old information centre in the Botanic Gardens. Have we got? I mean, I note that there's a program around Botanic Gardens, but is there a specific thing to demolish it or to retain it? What would be where would we make the call?
There's nothing on the radar to demolish it at this point. The spatial plan kind of recommends that once, if we get to the point that we've developed the Science and Research Centre, then the future life of that could be reconsidered.
Right. I guess
once we've actually got replacement facilities, which is a long-term initiative.
Oh yeah, no. This is the old, the one by the river, by the lake.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking.
It's currently an art exhibition centre.
Well, it has multiple functions. Yeah, staff use it.
So would we be able to? I'm just trying to understand what if we wanted to retain it rather than have it scheduled for demolition, because some people are concerned that in the spatial plan it talks about demolition. Would we put that in the activity management plan to retain it as a building, a non-heritage listed parks building?
What you're essentially asking is to amend the approved council spatial plan. Kind of falls into that category of holding on to everything, even if it's not an optimal purpose. The people that have developed the spatial plan for the Botanic Gardens, all of the built needs for the future are in that spatial plan, and it suggests that that building could be removed in the future, and primarily for the purpose of opening up that part of the Botanic Gardens for botanic purposes. So not until at some stage in the future, all the other facilities are built.
Yep,
is the straight answer.
Yep.
So there's no need to do anything in the short term because there's no plans to do anything in the short term.
So
we could consult.
Yanni, one of the things that Lynn said right at the start, you weren't here, that we've got to keep this conversation as high as we can and not get down into individual projects. Yeah. So
adopted the spatial plan, there was a big discussion about whether things would be consulted on or whether that was, and we were sort of given an undertaking that things would be consulted on at a high level, significant projects through that plan. I guess what I'm trying to understand is when we go out with the LTP and we've got a list of the Botanic Garden things that we're going to do, Should we be consulting on some of those things that, you know, that we're planning on doing for the next 10 years, right?
So rather than answering that question
Yeah.
today, I think we need to look at everything that we've got and that what is the appropriate level of consultation that we need to undertake as part of the LTP? And is there any further additional consultation that may need to be undertaken? That is not saying, Yanni, that we will consult on every
I understand
single
that.
item.
I just
to be clear.
wonder
that's
whether
all.
it's better to just, I mean, I personally support retaining it, but I appreciate people have different views. I just wonder if it's more efficient to actually just put it as part of the LTP than have a standalone discrete consultation that
That's
costs a lot, that is a separate process.
You and I are in agreement. We just need to review exactly what should be in the LTP as part of consultation and what shouldn't. And we're not at that stage yet.
Okay, all good. We'll come back at 11:15, please. Thank you, Andrew. Very good indeed.
I know there's some delayed birthday celebration cake coming out in